Did the United States foreign policy during the 1930s help promote World War II? During the 1930s, the United States went through a dramatic change in foreign policy that would help determine future world events. As a response to World War I and the Great Depression, Congress changed its policy to become more isolationist in order to focus on recovering from the economic downturn. In doing so, they ignored European issues and events so that in the process of trying to stay out of the war, they actually helped promote it. It was this chain of events that made U.S. entry into the war almost ironic. The Depression was the initial cause for change in foreign policy. Along with lingering resentment of involvement in World War I, the Depression forced the government to turn away from world events to address problems at home. The economic collapse affected not only the United States but the rest of the world as well, and as a whole, nations became collectively ignorant of international events. The U.S. receded into isolationism, and while acknowledging many of the events in Europe disapprovingly, failed to take any other action. The U.S. also reduced its involvement in Central and South America with the Good Neighbor policy. One way the U.S. receded into isolationism was the legislation of protective tariffs. These closed America to foreign markets and made it so Americans had to buy American. It starts with the Tariff Act of 1930, or the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, which was created to help American industry and agriculture recover from the sudden economic drop. However, it only worsened relations with the rest of the world, and trade came to an all-time low. Between 1929 and 1924, world trade, consisting largely of U.S. shipping, decreased by 66%. The greatest influence on American isolationism, at least politically, was the Neutrality Acts of 1930. Designed with the strict purpose of keeping the United States out of another world war, the Neutrality Acts let the events in Europe unfold without hindrance, and then promoted World War II. The first precursor to the Neutrality Acts was the Johnson Act in 1934, which made it so debt defaulting nations could not market securities in the U.S. The first of the Neutrality Acts was passed on August 31, 1935, and prohibited the export of arms, ammunition, and implements of war to any belligerent country at war. More were passed from 1935 to 1937. One created the cash and carry law, which required belligerents to pay in cash and transport war materials such as steel on their own ship. Another law required that no American travel on a belligerent ship. The last of these Neutrality Acts enacted that the belligerents could not float loans in the United States. These were some of the last acts of Congress in the present to stay out of the war. As things in Europe got worse and the fighting actually began, the U.S. quickly realized that neutrality was impossible. President Roosevelt would lift the arms embargo in order to support the Allies, and instead created the Lend-Lease Act. This allowed for the Lend-Lease or transfer of military equipment necessary for preservation to non-aggressor nations. Also, the draft of the Atlantic Charter, while not explicitly stating so, was a promise from the United States to help defend democracy and join the war. However, by refusing to interfere in Europe for so long, America had let fascist dictators rise to power and begin their war. It was already too late, and the United States' isolationist policies are actually what would drag her to war. Pearl Harbor, while having the part of finally and officially pulling the U.S. into war, did only that, and it would have happened eventually, one way or another. World War II had begun, and like the rest of the world, the United States would become involved. So in conclusion, yes, the foreign policies of the 1930s let fascists in Europe arise without any hindrance. These are what would bring the U.S. to war. Isolation backfired on the United States.